When Tyler's phone rang, he nearly dropped it in the floorboard as he went to grab it. The sun was going down, and he still hadn't found the writer. That was okay. Tomorrow was another day, but as the phone buzzed, he figured it would be one of the book club. Nobody really called him after about 5 p.m., and he'd been thinking about taking the truck back to the depot and locking it up for the night. He had burned a lot of gas today, and it might be nice to do a little recon in his old pickup instead. The big green truck was big and powerful, but it was a real gas guzzler when it came to just running the roads. "Tyler Durden, Waste Management. How may I help you, sir or ma'am?" "I've got him. Come down to the cemetery as fast as you can." Tyler pulled the phone from his ear and looked at the number. Wasn't a number he was familiar with, and this wasn't a voice he was familiar with either. He didn't know who was calling him, which made him a little nervous because he prided himself on knowing everyone in town. "Who is this?" "It's Earl, or at least the person you know as Earl. Just get down here before he wakes up. I've only got one more needle of tranquilizer left, and I don't really want to shoot him up so close on the first dose. Too much of this stuff could kill him, and we need him alive." Tyler started to ask who it was again, but then the phone went dead, and he was left listening to a dial tone. Tyler was left with only two options: obey or ignore. He turned his truck towards the cemetery. He decided he would go and see what all the stir was about. Earl, or whatever was running him these days, was someone he did not want to trifle with on short acquaintances. When the flip phone in his pocket rang, Brandon put his foot down on the sidewalk and reached for it. It had been a long day. He'd made about 12 deliveries, everywhere, from the outskirts of town to a shop right beside the restaurant they had ordered from. He was sweaty, his legs were tired, and he just knew that there were stains in his armpits. He expected it would be another order, probably his last one for the day, but instead it was a number he didn't recognize. It was a local number, but he didn't believe he'd ever gotten a call from it before. "This is Brandon. If you're trying to get bike meals, you need to come to the cemetery. I've got him." Brandon had the same amount of confusion that Tyler had had. He didn't recognize the voice, but if they were calling from the cemetery, then it had to be Earl. A few times he'd spoken with Earl, the man who possessed that backwoods twang that seemed prominent out here. He sounded like a good old boy who was just doing what he had to do, but now he sounded completely different. The voice reminded him of Brother Thomas, but it was something colder. It reminded him of a film he had watched when he was a kid, a cartoon version of the Garden of Eden, where a snake had spoken to Eve. Its voice had been terrible, like a demon's voice. And that's a little what this was like. "Earl?" he asked, as he leaned against a sign to keep his balance. "Sure, why not? Whatever gets you to the graveyard the fastest. I have the writer. He's fallen into my hands, and I'm going to need help securing him. I need you to get down here as quickly as you can, so we can get him into Tyler's truck before anyone notices. It's evening. The gates to the cemetery are locked, so I need you to hurry before someone starts asking questions." He hung up on him then, and Brandon was left looking at the phone and wondering what he should do. There was no question what he would do. He would go to the cemetery. When someone called and told you they had captured the person you were seeking, you went and you helped. There was no time for questions, and there was no time for doubting. You had to go. You had to help. It's what Brother Thomas would tell him to do. It's probably what the Bright would tell him to do, but once again, Brandon just wasn't sure. His phone buzzed again. He looked down to see that it was a text from his boss. "A big order just came in. It's from the sub club. It's a doozy. Probably worth about $300, but you'll have to split it with Chase. It's too much for one bike driver, and it'll take both of you. Meet him down at the sub club in about 5 minutes. Don't be late. Don't be late. That part stuck in his brain, but instead, Brandon turned his bike towards the cemetery and began to pedal. If they had the rider, then his job was meaningless. His life was meaningless. His pursuits were meaningless. Everything was meaningless. He owed it to the Bright to go and be of assistance, and he needed to be quick. If the rider woke up and there was no one there to help, things could go sideways very quickly. His boss would be upset, but these were the breaks when you were dealing with matters on a cosmic scale. Angela was cleaning the table of dinner dishes when the phone on the wall rang. "I'll get it," her husband said as he started to get up, but Angela told him to sit down and that she would get it. They had just finished a lovely dinner of pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and chocolate pudding for dessert. Her son was asking her for more juice, but Angela thought he might better switch to water before bedtime. It was his third juice today, the special juice that the church had given her, and she was a little worried about how much he liked it. He'd been talking to himself a lot. He'd been getting in trouble at school for not paying attention, and she was worried that there might be more than juice in there. She didn't think they would give her anything that would hurt her son, but it was beginning to look like it might be having negative effects on him. Angela caught the phone on the third ring and asked who it was. "I need you to call the book club and send them down to the cemetery as quickly as possible. I have the writer, but if you want to secure him, they need to be quick. I need at least 3 to 4 hands in the next 15 minutes. Make it happen." Then he hung up before Angela could even ask who it was. The cemetery. That had to be Earl, but it didn't sound anything like Earl. Angela had known Earl quite a while, and he had never spoken in anything other than that backwoods twang that she was so familiar with. She couldn't think of anyone else it could be, but the voice on the phone had reminded her of Brother Thomas more than anything. "Who was that, dear?" her husband asked, as he pushed away from the table and went to the cabinet to get himself a drink. No one. Someone from the book club wants me to call around about a meeting. They want to do the meeting a couple of days early, so they don't miss a doctor's appointment." "You and that book club," her husband said good-naturedly. "I suspect it's a bunch of old hens cackling about some new romance novel, isn't it?" If only he knew, Angela thought. She prepared another lie. "That's just what it is, dear. Let me make some phone calls, and you go have a drink." Mom, can I have more juice? I'd really like more juice." She looked down at him and felt something in her chest that she hadn't before. His eyes were shining like a cat caught in a flash. He looked half crazed, and Angela suddenly wondered if she could stand to give him the juice any longer. "It's almost bedtime, sugar. Why don't you get some water instead? You don't want to pee the bed, do you?" No, I guess not. Maybe just a little bit of juice? Just a little bit?" Angela gave in. She really was a soft touch when it came to her son. She gave him just a little more juice, and after he drank it quicker than expected, she gave him some water and sent him to go get ready for bed. Then she started making phone calls in preparation for whatever was to come. She had to be quick. She had to be sure. They had to take the rider quickly, or risk losing him forever. The right things would need to be done, and she was still strong enough to see it through. In the cemetery, Earl sat with the rider as he leaned heavily against his shoulder. "I hadn't thought it would be this easy," Earl said to himself. Of course, it wasn't really Earl. It was the creature that had taken up residence with him when he had looked into that strange book. Earl had fought. He fought as hard as he could, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. He had been taken nonetheless, and now he sat in the back seat of his own mind, and watch things as they played out. The creature had done this many times, taking people and making them the way that he was. He couldn't say that he liked it or disliked it. It was something he did. It was his purpose. And now, his purpose was to open the gate so that his people could come in. All things served the bright, even the shadows around the edges of the light. Very soon, you'll be like us, he said, as he heard the rumble of the garbage truck pulling up to the back gate. And this whole town will be under new management. Fancy seeing you here. Sheriff Guthrie looked up to find Dr. Winters and Mr. Seraph sitting at the bar. He had come into the bus station to get a drink before heading home, but he hadn't expected the pair of demons to be sitting at the bar and seemingly waiting for him. Guthrie had really only wanted to get a couple of beers before driving home. It had been a hell of a day, and he was ready to pass into oblivion. He knew it probably wasn't the best look for the town sheriff to be driving home buzzed, but he really didn't care today. Likewise, I hadn't expected to see either of you here. Do you... He cleared his throat and glanced around before continuing. Do you even drink? Mr. Seraph smiled at him. We do. We don't need to. It doesn't do as much for us as it does for your kind, but we like to imbibe every now and again. Makes us a little mellow, and that's something I could use after today. Guthrie popped down on a bar stool beside him and ordered a Bud Light. I hear you there. Today started before dawn, and it didn't end until way after the sun went down. He had just taken that first experimental sip, the alcohol rolling down his throat, when he suddenly remembered something from earlier that day. Hey, Doc, did the writer ever get up with you? Dr. Winters scrunched up her nose as she drank something that smelled like radiator fluid from a tall glass. Yes, thank you so very much for sending him to me, she said, her words tinged with sarcasm. It was so nice to have my daily operations upset by the sudden needs of the writer. Well, he said somebody was after him, so it seemed like the best place to send him. I know you usually look after him, so, well, maybe it's someone else's turn to take up some of the slack, Dr. Winters suddenly said, a little louder than she meant to. I've been watching out for him for a very long time. I know I owe him a lot of my success. I owe him the place I live, but he has to understand that I have schedules and clients and things that I can't simply break because he needs help all of a sudden. And who's going to teach him that? Mr. Seraph asked, as he watched the droplets roll down the side of his own glass. It's not like you drop what you're doing to facilitate him every time he comes to the door. Maybe it's time the two of you had a talk about boundaries. You tell me that he pops in pretty much every day. Why haven't you had this conversation before? That was a good question, and Dr. Winters was suddenly struck by the strangeness of it. Why hadn't she asked herself that question? Her anger had been very sudden. It had come on like a storm out of a valley. It was completely unfamiliar to her. She had never thought of the writer and his intrusions as anything other than mildly inconvenient. Today, however, it had been such an inconvenience that she had gone off on him. Why had that been? What had led to it? Her day was busy, but it had been no busier than any other day. Why today of all days? Who did he say was after him? Dr. Winters said as she turned back to Guthrie. Guthrie took another long pull off his bottle before smacking his lips and putting it down. He didn't say. He just said that someone was after him. In this climate, it's hard not to believe it was the bright people. They seem to be after everyone these days, and I suppose it's not that out of the ordinary that they would be after him, too. He's kind of important. At least that's what you keep telling me. He was important. He was very important. And as the jukebox swapped between Hank Williams and Travis Tritt, Dr. Winters began to get the feeling that something had happened that was going to be hard to take back. The writer had often talked to her about the story of the town, the story of them, the story of everything. He often said that if the story wasn't told properly, then it could turn against him. He led her to believe that down that way might lie madness, but she had never really believed it. It was just something he said. He was a half-crazy old man, except that he wasn't. He was probably stuck between 30 and 40, and the story seemed to be the only real constant in his life. Was it possible that the story had made her angry? Was it possible that the story had made Guthrie send the writer to her? "Brother," she said, "you said you had an odd day as well. What sort of strangeness came to you?" She asked it suddenly, working on a theory. "Well," Mr. Seraph said as he took another sip of his drink, "it was the writer as well, actually. He came in offering to sell me his talent. Can you believe it? He just wanted to sell it." Dr. Winters gave him an icy look that her brother could feel on the side of his face. It was like frost on the side of a window pane, and he shivered a little at the attention. "And did you?" his sister asked, her words venomous. "Of course not. You made it very clear what would happen if I bought his talent." "No, I refused to, as anyone would refuse a man in that state. I like my marks a little desperate, but he was practically giving it away. He told me that someone was after him, and that if he didn't have the talent, then they might give up on him. A lot of people have been saying that lately. Well, not a lot, but he would be the second, and that is a strange coincidence. Most of the time, people are simply interested in selling what they don't need, or selling what is no longer interesting or fortuitous. He just wanted to be rid of it, so that people would leave him alone. I sent him on his way, told him I had no interest, and then something very strange happened." Guthrie and Winter sat silently for a few seconds, and when Mr. Seraph didn't surrender the information, his sister sighed exasperatedly and finally asked him what it was. In truth, Mr. Seraph was trying to do nothing so dramatic. He was simply trying to make sense of it himself. "He tried to change my mind, but he did it in a very strange way. It was as if he were trying to rewrite a story. He said, 'Mr. Seraph changes his mind and decides to buy the writer's talent.' Just like that. It was like he was trying to change a story, and all he had to do was speak it into existence. I've seen some strange things in my time, but that one was definitely odd." Winter took another sip as she thought about that. She believed he might have been trying to do just that, and it explained why he had been so crazed lately. How much of the story had he been trying to rewrite? How much of his mind was lost due to the exercise? Futile or not, how much damage had he done? "Sheriff, have you seen him since this morning?" Winter asked, dreading the answer. "No, actually I haven't. It's weird, I usually see him a dozen times a day, but today, it was just the one time." Winter listened as the song ended, and something by Foreigner took its place. She didn't like the way it felt. She didn't like it at all. As the song began, Winter found she was feeling a little hot-blooded as well. "Sister," Mr. Seraph asked, "what's wrong?" I'm afraid we've been played. I think we need to find the writer, and we need to do it quickly. I'm afraid he's been captured by whoever was after him. I'm afraid it's all my fault." Mr. Seraph put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You couldn't have known he was serious. He's always saying crazy things by the sound of it." "That's not what I mean. It sounds like the story he was so concerned about has turned against him. He might already be a victim of change, and we just have to find him before it's too late." "Too late for what?" Guthrie asked, suddenly having no taste for his beer. "I'm worried they may not just be after him to take him out of the game," Winter said. "I'm worried they might be intending to turn him, and if they do, it could have terrible consequences for the town. If he still controls the story and the Bright controls him, then we could be living on borrowed time already." The three of them set out, scouring Old Town and everywhere for the writer, but it was too late. The book club was already gathering to take him off the board, and the story was turning from the town and heading down a very dark path. Brandon pulled his bike around the back of the cemetery and could see a small group of people already gathering there. He could see Tyler's big green garbage truck as well, and wondered if he was the last to arrive. He didn't have to wonder long, because other stragglers were walking up as he put the kickstand down and came around to open the back gate of the boneyard. There were about 12 of them already inside, and he could see another dozen coming up behind him on bikes and scooters or even just their own 2 feet. It was quite a collection, and it made him realize just how large the book club had become. Most of them were people he had known all his life, people who worked in town, people who ordered food from him, people who had gone to school with him, or people who had gone to school with his parents. But in a town like Kashmir, there were new people every day, and it was hard to really remember everyone. Sometimes people go out of sight, and you forget about them for a little while, only to run into them at the grocery store or the gas station, and suddenly remember that they existed. He wondered if it was like that for them, too. He supposed it must be. Maybe everybody was just going about their lives, waiting to remember others who had gone out of sight. He heard the beep of the garbage truck as it backed up, and he had to get inside the gate as it rolled into the pleasant lawns of Whispering Pines Cemetery. Tyler wasn't being careful, and Brandon winced as he tipped over a gravestone and nearly ran over another smaller headstone. God forbid the ground give out from under that heavy truck. What would they say to the wrecker that came to pull the truck out? "Sorry, I was just trying to make a pickup in the graveyard, and I accidentally drove into a shallow grave." Yeah, he was sure that would look really good. He grabbed a hold of the rearview mirror and pulled himself up onto the running board of the garbage truck as Tyler backed toward a bench near the back fence. The back fence had a little hill that overlooked the woods, and the bench was almost picturesque. You could probably sit there and see the sunset most any day of the week, and it was a nice place to think about your loved ones who might be buried only a few feet away. Right now, there were 2 people sitting on it, and Brandon was pretty sure that one of them was the writer. That meant the other one was probably Earl, or whoever Earl was these days. "Squeeze over, kid. I need both mirrors." Brandon moved a little, flattening himself against the side of the truck so that Tyler didn't hit any more of the dearly departed on his way back. The man looked half crazed, something on his face letting Brandon know that he was both ecstatic and furious. He had probably wanted to be the one who discovered the writer, but as long as the man was found, that was okay. They just needed him found. They didn't need anybody fighting over credit. "Has he said anything?" Brandon asked, as the garbage man pulled a little closer and weaved between plots. "Nope. I guess the writer came here to get away from it all. but he never realized that it was waiting for him here. Now we've got him. There's nothing he can do about it. Brandon quietly doubted that, but it was hard to argue with facts. The man was slumped against Earl, the pair seeming to be taking in the sunset, even as his minions came to do his dirty work. Brandon hoped the truck was clean, but he shook his head and thought that, of course, it would be clean. Tyler probably hadn't picked up anything all day. He would have wanted to keep it empty, just in case he had to go collect their prize. It was strange how things had come together so quickly. Just yesterday, they had been wondering how they would get a hold of him. And now, they had him. It was like one of those stories where a series of events just seems to lay out perfectly. It was like reading a story and discovering that the plot had moved along by a mysterious, unseen hand. Maybe the writer had written it himself. Maybe the story had simply gotten away from him. Either way, he was there now. And the story would be whatever they wanted it to be. Tyler pulled the truck as close as he dared, and when they got out, he could see the men and women that had assembled were circled around the two men on the bench as if afraid to get much closer. They didn't quite know what to make of all this, and they were maybe a little scared of the man who now snoozed against the shoulder of one of their newest members. Earl had really covered himself in glory today. He had already been well liked in the book club and in town, but now it seemed he could place himself amongst the founding members and be right at home. Maybe that had been his intention all along. Maybe he was simply trying to cozy in with them because he knew that the end was coming. Either way, Brandon thought, as he shook the thought away, it didn't really matter. They had the writer, and that was the important part. "How did you get him?" Tyler asked, as he approached, keeping his voice low as if it might wake the man. "He came to me," Earl said, as he reached up and stroked the man's hair almost lovingly. "He came to the cemetery, seeking sanctuary, and instead found himself in a net. I do hope that truck is clean, Tyler. Otherwise, he'll just have to sit amongst the garbage." "It's clean," Tyler assured him. "I haven't picked up anything all day. He'll be snug as a bug back there." "I'm glad to hear it," Earl said, as he looked back at them and smiled. "This is precious cargo we're hauling today." His words seemed to break whatever spell hung amongst them. They approached and lifted the man as gently as if he were a kitten. They brought him to the truck, carrying him as if he were the winner of a football match. He never stirred in his drug-induced slumber, just lying there and snoring as he was passed from hand to hand towards his conveyance. It all seemed so strange to Brandon, like a scene from a movie that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The man was both their prize and their sacrifice, their hero and their enemy, and there was both fear and worship amongst them as they approached the garbage truck. Tyler got back behind the wheel, and the back door opened like some great monster ready to receive its meal. Brandon shuddered as those lips parted, and he could see the sterile interior of the truck. Tyler had washed it just for the occasion, and it only slightly smelled of old garbage. The inside was likely clean enough to eat out of, though Brandon would never feel quite that brave. There seemed to be some confusion on how exactly they would get him in there, but Tyler came out, and he and Brandon and Earl, as well as a couple of others, pulled him into the truck and laid him on the shiny green floor. "Make sure you don't smash it," Brandon said offhandedly. "We don't want to accidentally crush our special guest." Tyler grinned at him, but it was a grin full of poison. "Don't tell me how to be a garbage man, little buddy. I know what to and what not to pull once this baby is going." Do you want me to come along and help you with him once you get him where you're going?" Brandon asked before he could stop himself. In truth, he kind of wanted to ride home and think about all of this. but something told him that Tyler might need help getting the man back out of the truck. He wasn't large, wasn't even particularly heavy, but it would need to be done carefully, and if anything happened before he was secured, it would be very bad for the book club. "Sure," Tyler said. "I think there's a couple of hooks on the side. You can hang your bike off of those. I usually use them for shovels, but they seem to be about the right distance apart." With Tyler's help, Brandon had the bike between the hooks. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for something like this. Maybe that was the story helping them as well. Who knew? "Get him back there quickly," Earl said, as the others began to dissipate. "Remember," he said, talking to everyone who was now leaving, "you haven't seen the rider. You don't know where he is. Everything will be moving rather quickly now, and we don't need anyone stumbling across him before Brother Thomas arrives." "We'll get him set up," Tyler said, as he clapped the gravedigger on the shoulder. "Good work today. We couldn't have done it without you." Earl smiled, but Brandon felt it wasn't the man's smile at all. It was like watching a dog with a mouthful of human teeth. Horrific, and a little off-putting. You could have. It just wouldn't have been as quick. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Call me when you get him set up. We'll have to set up some kind of watch schedule." Tyler said that they would, and Brandon climbed into the passenger side as the two men got rolling back through the old town toward the dump. It all seemed so strange to him now that it was over. He hadn't expected to catch the rider quite this soon, and now that they had him, it all seemed a little anticlimactic. It was as if some unseen hand had moved them into position. Some other unseen rider was putting them exactly where they needed to be, and Brandon felt unsure of himself for the first time in quite a while. Was he the one moving himself, or was it just destiny? He didn't like feeling powerless like that, but he supposed it was how he should have been feeling for a while now. How much control had he really had over himself for the past few months? He had simply been moved by the bright, and he was only just beginning to look at it without the shiny eyes of the zealot. "Tyler," he asked suddenly, as the man turned down the road that would take them to the dump, is what we're doing right?" He'd expected Tyler to chastise him, but when the man laughed, it took him by surprise. "Right or wrong, we've come too far to turn back now. I don't know if this town is right, or the bright is right, or what any of it is anymore, but I know that the bright has promised me a better way. I assume it's promised you something as well. Everyone has their price. So stay the course and get your reward, little buddy. Otherwise, what's it all been for? Otherwise, you've betrayed your town for nothing, haven't you?" Brandon looked back out the window as the dump came into view. What a place for someone like this. Brandon supposed he should get used to it. He'd likely be seeing a lot of it in the near future. He'd be coming here often as he helped them take care of the rider. His work for the bright never seemed to end. "We have a problem." The chatter around the council table died down as Dr. Winter spoke those 4 words. Everyone there had their own problems. A lot of them were town problems, but most of them also didn't have time for new problems. There was enough on their plate to take care of as it was, and the idea of something new rearing up was enough to draw groans out of most of them. "Well," the mayor said, as he extended a pudgy hand for orders, "you have the floor, Dr. Winters. Tell us our problem." She had brought everyone she would need, and the rest were already here. Sheriff Guthrie, the warden, and even Mr. Seraph had been invited to sit in on this one. They had all been looking for the rider for a couple of days now, but they couldn't find him. A couple of days? Hell, it had been a week. No one had seen the rider for 5 days, and that was abnormal, because usually not a day went by that somebody didn't complain about the man. He was lurking in front of their business and babbling nonsense. He was screaming at the birds at an abandoned lot out in Old Town. He was standing in traffic and just looking lost. Sheriff Guthrie couldn't honestly say there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't get at least one complaint about the man. But for the last 5 days, there had been nothing. Not a phone call, not a passerby on the street saying something. Nothing. Winter hadn't seen him in the clinic either, and his visits had become more persistent before he vanished. She could honestly say that not a week went by that she didn't see him at least once or twice. Now he was gone, and that did not bode well. The writer is missing. She put it out there without a lot of excitement, but she saw the way that everyone looked at her as the words settled over the room. "How can you be sure?" said the kid from the bus station. "Sometimes he just goes away for a little while, just because nobody's seen him in a couple of days." "They haven't seen him in a couple of days," Dr. Winter cut in, "because no one has seen him in a couple of days. Sheriff Guthrie, how often do you get calls about the writer?" "Usually about twice a day," Sheriff Guthrie said, as he put in his little bit of help. "I haven't seen him either, and he often comes to the clinic. I've asked around, and none of the usual people who report seeing him have seen him. I went to his house, and the door was unlocked. The housekeeper's come and gone, but there's no new mess. There's no sign that he's returned in almost a week. The house is still clean, and that worries me." "So he's trying to fix his slovenly habits," the kid said as he spread his hands wide. "There's no crime against that." Winter glowered at the kid, but he seemed unimpressed. "He is very important to the town. Something I've reiterated several times, and I feel like we need to be more concerned about his absence." The mayor looked around the room at those assembled, finally landing on John Marvolo. "Has the writer ever gone missing like this before?" John shook his head slowly. "Not that I can ever remember, Mayor. He's pretty well always been here for as long as anyone can remember. He's a nuisance sometimes, but he's a town nuisance, and we don't mind having him around. He draws a lot of attention to himself sometimes, and that's part of the problem. If he's not drawing attention to himself, then where is he? Dr. Winters is right. Nuisance or not, he is very important to this town." The mayor looked to Sheriff Guthrie, and the man sat up a little straighter as his gaze fell on him. "Guthrie, have some of your men look around for him. He's probably just laid up somewhere. Maybe he has a cold or he's gotten injured, and someone else is looking after him." "Unfortunately, Mayor, that's what I've been doing for the past 5 days. Dr. Winters brought this to my attention a while ago, and I've been looking for him ever since. Nobody seems to be able to find him. Nobody seems to know where he's gone, and that's a big problem." "I'm sorry," the kid from the bus station said as he looked around at all of them in disbelief. "Why exactly is that a problem? The guy just wanders around and yells. He doesn't really do anything. He doesn't really provide any kind of service. Why would we be worried that he's gone?" Dr. Winters, not for the first time, wanted to reach over the table and shake the kid. She knew he was no kid. He had been in town for a very long time, and she didn't understand how he could be so naive. Maybe, with that kind of time, he'd forgotten his own experience with the writer, but she honestly believed it was a sort of ignorance that he had chosen on purpose. Perhaps he had some kind of traumatic past that he was attempting to hide. Maybe it was just something he didn't want to think about any more than he had to, but the kid often said things or did things that would make no sense for a being as old as him. Because, if he's right, he's all that's keeping the town from collapsing. The kid rolled his eyes and shook his head. "Yeah, 'cause he's the one writing our bibliography, right? He's the one who's writing all of our stories, and he's the one who's making all this happen, right? Well, if he's the writer of all this stuff, then why is it still going on without him? He's not the one who's creating the story. He just writes what he hears. He has a connection to the story of this place, and we must have him here so we can get the line of the tale and keep it on track. He may move all of us, whether he knows it or not, and if we lose him, we might lose ourselves as well. I don't know about all of you, but I'm not in a big hurry to cease to exist. Me either, the warden said, though he sounded oddly amused by the notion. Neither am I, Mr. Seraph said, though he sounded deadly serious. The last time I saw him, he tried to change the story so that he might be spared, and it felt as if he might have lost something in the exchange. His power is strong, but he can't change certain facts about whatever he's telling. He's as much of a slave to his story, just as we all are. Trying to mess with certain things causes him to become detached from reality. And what do we base this idea on? The mayor asked, as he stared at the demon. Nothing concrete, Mr. Seraph said, merely speculation. Well, the kid said with a scoff, I'm not checking the sewers and alleyways on a hunch. He'll be back. He always resurfaces. He's just doing the crazy thing in a different part of town for now. It's nothing to get worried about. God, open your eyes, man. There's more going on here than any of us can understand. Even if he's just delusional, do we really want the Bright to use him for whatever they intend to use him for? He's part of this town. We owe it to him to protect him. My sentiments exactly, the mayor said. I want efforts exhausted looking for him. He needs to be found and back to being a nuisance post-haste. I'm sure these Bright bastards are to blame for this somehow, and I don't want them to get the chance to pick his brain and figure out just how important he is. Guthrie, find him. Kid, ask around and see who's seen him. Marvelo, get on your little radio show and tell people to keep an eye out for him. Everyone else, keep an eye out for the writer. In the meantime, is there anything else to discuss? Eyes were cast around, and when no one jumped, it was decided that the meeting was adjourned. As they left, Dr. Winters kept her seat, glaring at the mayor as if he had the writer in his back pocket. They aren't taking this very seriously, she said, glowering after them as they left. They don't understand his importance. I'm honestly not sure I do either. He might be better off with the Bright, but he's our town nut, and we're not going to give him up without a fight. Dr. Winters was glad to hear it, but she had hoped that the mayor might understand what was at stake here. He had existed here a long time. Not as long as her, but still a long time. The town was no mystery to him, and she had hoped that he would know that the writer and the town were two peas in a pod. They had to find him, and soon. The consequences could be dire otherwise. Hey, everybody. It's been a little while. I bet you never thought you'd hear from me again. It's been about 3 months since Gail, Celine, and I escaped from the Dollar General beyond, and a lot has changed. First off, I haven't been back inside a Dollar General since the night I first stepped into the bathroom and was cast into the infinite Dollar General. I took the money that Agent Cash gave me and put a down payment on a place. I didn't have anything to move. All my stuff got taken or donated when I didn't pay my rent. Luckily, my parents had gotten my car from the impound, so that was a nice surprise. The amount I'd gotten put some basic furniture in my house, and it's got a little backyard for Buddy to run in. Before you ask, don't worry, I didn't break the bank, and I got all my furniture from Goodwill and barely broke a couple of $100. I've got a buddy who's a stockbroker that I gave a little money to, and he's been giving me updates that sound pretty good to me. I never thought I'd be one of those Wall Street guys, but so far, I haven't had to go back to work. It's just been Buddy and me for the last little bit, watching movies and enjoying being back in the real world. I wish I could say that all of us have been enjoying our time in the real world, but that'd be a lie. Celine and Gail have been living in motels mostly. They decided to stay together, no surprise there, and I saw a pair of rings last time we met up, which makes me think they're planning on making it official. We still meet up for food, or I have them over to the house for dinner, once or twice a week. Celine is adjusting well, but Gail looks pretty rough. Nah, not rough. Gail looks haunted. Something happened to him in the ceiling, something he still won't talk about, and I think it's making him crazy. Being around Celine seems to help, but when she isn't around, I see him looking really nervous. He looks like he hasn't been sleeping, and Celine confirmed that she didn't think he has been either. She said that she wakes up sometimes to find him staring into the bathroom door, and it scares her a little. He won't answer me right away when I call him, and I thought at first that he was sleepwalking. He just stares at the door, seeing something only he can see, but when I touch him, he jumps like I've burned him. I don't know what he's doing, but I'm afraid it's more of the same thing we saw in the Beyond. Gail denies it when I ask him, but I don't know if I believe him. Sometimes, when he's out with Celine or sitting at home, I see him staring at doors with a little more than curiosity. Last week, I caught him staring at the door to the bathroom for way too long, and when I touched his shoulder, he jumped, like I'd poked him with a live wire. He said he was just wool gathering, but I suspect that he's scared to open the door and find something other than a bathroom on the other side. Then, a week ago, Celine called me and said that Gail had been taken to jail. They thought he was drunk, and thank God for that. If they realized how far gone he was, they might have had him committed. Gail went into a Dollar General near the hotel where they were staying at, and after getting the key, he just opened the bathroom door and looked into the space as if he could see something. He closed the door and opened it again, and after doing this for about 15 minutes, the manager went to try and get him to stop. When he wouldn't, he tried to take the key from him. Gail didn't seem to like that. He scuffled with the manager, trying to get the key back, but the manager was an ex-Marine and put Gail on his head. They called the cops, and Gail ended up in the drunk tank. "Can you bail him out?" Celine asked. "I can give you the money, but I'm not sure he'll come with me if I go to get him. He's proud, you know that. I don't think he would want me to see him like that." I told her I would. Also told her she didn't have to pay. And after thanking me, she made an odd request. Ask him what it is he's looking for in those doors. I think he might talk to you if you ask him about it. He doesn't want to worry me, but you two have been through it together. He'll talk to you. I know he will. I told her I would try, but I honestly wasn't too hopeful. I'd been asking for a while and getting a similar answer, but it appeared I was about to learn the truth. The guy at the bail counter asked me if I was sure I wanted him, and I guess Gail had been showing his ass a little. I hardly recognized the guy they brought out. He looked rough, his hair longer than usual, and his face looking oddly long too. It was weird not to recognize someone you'd seen less than a week ago, but I think it was the dark circles more than anything. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days, and I could certainly relate. Every time I slept, my mind returned to the beyond, and it was pretty jarring. One bail payment later, and Gale and I were on our way back to a diner, not too far from the hotel that he stayed at. He seemed to realize we were taking the long way, and he gave me a look of sad resolve. "She wants you to talk to me, doesn't she?" "Yeah," I said, deciding not to beat around the bush. "She's worried about you, man. And I am too." We pulled into the diner, and I got us a booth near the back so we wouldn't be heard. I hadn't seen anybody from the organization for a while, but I was still a little paranoid about being overheard. I wasn't sure this would count as some kind of violation of the rules or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. We got coffees, and when the waitress left, I leaned in close so no one would overhear us. "What are you thinking, Gale? Why would you ever go into one of those stores again? What if the bathroom had led back to the beyond?" Gale stared into his coffee as the milk swirled inside it, and I didn't think he was going to answer me for a minute. "I was hoping it would," he finally said. I was speechless, not really sure how to answer him. The waitress came to take our order and left again, after taking one look at us. I guess we looked pretty rough. "Why would you ever want to go back there?" I asked, after some time, not really sure what to expect. "Because when I was there, I could get away from the miasma. But now that I'm here, I can see them all the time." "What are you talking about?" I asked him, not really sure what to make of that. I hadn't seen one of them since we left the beyond, and I prayed I never would. No one wants to come face to face with a living giant shadow at the best of times, and being in the beyond was far from anyone's idea of the best of times. Gale stared into his coffee a little more, the milk making mystic patterns in the dark liquid, before he went on and told me how his mind had begun to fray. "They follow me everywhere. Every time I wake up, I can see them on the ceiling. They watch me from the dark corners of my room. I can feel their eyes on me as they stare from the darkness, and I know they're watching me, even on the brightest day. It's all I can do not to scream. I'll go to the bathroom sometimes, expecting things to change when I open the door, but they always stay the same. The doors here go nowhere, except where they're supposed to." "Gale," I told him, trying to make sense of all of this and failing, "you aren't making any sense, buddy." I guess I'm just afraid," he said in a small voice. "I'm afraid I'll open a door and find myself back in the beyond. I'm afraid that the miasma will get me if I stray too far into one of the corners. I'm afraid I'll wake up and all this will be a dream, but I'm also afraid that nothing is going to change. This place is different and strange, and after I spend so long on the other side, this world seems as odd as the beyond to me." He was quiet for a little bit, and I had time to order us both hotcakes and eggs, hash browns and bacon, and get another cup of coffee before he spoke again. "Most of all, I'm afraid they won't stop with me," he said, shaking a little as he looked at his feet. "I'm afraid they'll get Celine. I'm afraid they'll get you, too. Hell, I'm even afraid they'll get the damn dog. We did the impossible. We escaped their trap. They can't have that. They need us all back inside so we don't blab. They need it soon before someone figures it out." I didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't wrong. The fact that I've been talking to all of you is probably the only reason we haven't been snatched up by whatever mysterious organization congregates around the Dollar General, and I was pretty glad for that. If Gale was seeing miasmas outside the stores, then there were only two real options. First was that we were all in pretty big danger. The second was that Gale was losing it. Either way, we had to get him some help. I either had to figure out how to stop the miasma from attacking him, or figure out how to make him stop seeing them. I knew Gale wouldn't take medication. He didn't seem to trust anything that might alter his reality, and he also wouldn't even consider that all this might be in his head. He was determined to believe that these creatures were after him, and maybe they were. The problem was that if they were after him, then they'd come after all of us. Why just Gale? It didn't make any sense. Sense or not, I decided right then and there to keep an eye on him. At this rate, he'd either get himself tossed in jail or find himself back on the other side. I'm honestly not sure which one sounded less appealing. That's all I've got for now, guys. Till next time. By the time I pulled up at Corbin Heights Motor Lodge, I already had a plan brewing. Celine met me at the door of their motel, and I told her to pack what clothes they had. Pack? She asked in confusion. No, we're paid up through the week. I don't think they'd kick us out just because Gale, you two are coming to stay with me, I said, cutting her off. What? With you? No, we couldn't do that. It's such an imposition, and I know you're out of work, and we couldn't, but I waved her off again. I thought this might happen, so I went ahead and got the guest room ready. There's no sense wasting all your money on a motel room when I have a 3-bedroom house all to myself. You two can stay with me for as long as you need. Buddy will be ecstatic to have you guys there full time. So, they packed what little they had and followed me to my house. The two of them were used to living out of backpacks, and it was a habit they had carried over to this side too. Good thing too, because my little hatchback didn't offer much room. The two of them looked pretty cramped in the back seat, but when I noticed they were holding hands, it made me feel a little better about the whole situation. As long as we were together, nothing could get the better of us. The furball was indeed ecstatic. He danced around, tried to lick everyone at once, and he was absolutely ecstatic as my friends settled into the guest room easily enough. The few clothes and things they had fit easily in the closet. They brought the food they had in the room with them too, and we bought some groceries for the house after all their stuff was put away. That night, we all sat down to a fantastic meal of spaghetti and meatballs, and it honestly felt like old times as I sat around the table with them. That night, they both went to bed in a slightly used number that I'd gotten from Habitat for Humanity, and Buddy and I went to sleep in our room. At about 2, I heard Celine calling Gale. I stuck my head out to see what was going on, and there he was in the hallway, staring at the door that led to the crawl space. He had his head cocked like he couldn't quite make sense of it, and Celine was standing in the doorway and calling his name again and again. He took a step toward the door, but when Buddy let out a soft woof, Gale shook his head and seemed to hear him for the first time. He turned and went back into their room, and when the door to their room closed, I smiled and went back to sleep. Gale seemed to do better for the first few nights. He actually slept for a change. The bags under his eyes got a little better, and I started to think that being back among friends might help him get back to his regular self. He started looking and sounding more like his old self, too. He helped out around the house, he walked Buddy, and Celine said that he was finally sleeping through the night. If he still stopped and looked at open doors sometimes, it was only briefly. If he stared at the ceiling a little too long sometimes, well, he'd been through hell, so why wouldn't he check his surroundings? We made plenty of excuses for his strange behavior because it seemed to be getting better, and we so desperately wanted him to get better. I should have known the good times would be too good to last. On the 4th night in the house, Gale woke us all up screaming. It started around midnight. Buddy came awake fitfully from his bed in the corner. He was barking and scrabbling at the door, and I heard Celine calling Gale's name as she tried to calm him down. Gale was shouting about how they were here to get him, and I was careful to lock Buddy behind the door before I went to help. I could see light underneath the door, and when I opened it, I squinted as a searing light hit me in the face. Gale was wielding a maglite like a sword and flailing around as he lit up the ceiling. Celine was against the wall, trying her best not to be hit by the heavy light, and looked relieved when she saw me. She scooted around the bed and made her way to me, looking back at Gale as he looked around for whatever he thought was trying to get him. He was a man possessed, fighting them off like he meant to take on a whole army of miasma, but I doubted he was even awake. I closed the door to the guest room, locked it behind us, and left Gale to get it out of his system. Celine and I went to the kitchen, and I made some hot cocoa as she tried to calm down. "I've never seen him this bad," she said softly, her head in her hands, her body shaking a little. "So the night terrors are new then?" She nodded, accepting the cup of cocoa I offered her. "He's mumbled and thrashed some in his sleep, but he's never been violent. I'm worried. I don't know what we're going to do if he keeps doing this." I sipped my own cocoa, thinking about how to broach the subject that I had been considering. Could this be something different, besides something attacking him from the Dollar General beyond, I mean? "What do you mean?" Celine said. I started, trying to be tactful. "You and Gale were in the beyond longer than I was. Could be he experienced something in there like the hermit did. Could be," I almost whispered the last, not wanting to say it, "he's losing his mind." Celine pursed her lips, clearly not wanting to hear this. Jasper had dementia before he came to the beyond. Being there may have made it worse, but it wasn't the reason for it. I don't think Gale has dementia. I think he may have PTSD, but I think his mind is... She stumbled, not sure what she thought, but wanting to power ahead. "I think Gale is fine. He's just rattled is all." I nodded, sipping my cocoa as I tried to find a way to bring up something that might be a bit touchy. If he would go see a doctor or something, he could prescribe, but Celine was already shaking his head. "You know he won't go on medication. He doesn't trust anything anymore. He's stubborn. He says he lived in the beyond for too long, and he won't let them turn him into a zombie." We talked a little more, but it ultimately came to nothing. Finally, we heard him settle down, and I let Celine get some rest. "Give him some time. I think having some stability will be good for him," she said, before disappearing back up the hall. I wasn't so sure, but I kept it to myself. Gale became a sort of roller coaster of progress and backsliding. He'd be better for a few days, make headway. Then he'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night and spend the next few days jumping at shadows. I was looking as tired as he was, and the dark circles under my eyes had grown pretty deep. Even Buddy seemed lethargic. Celine was growing listless, and it became harder and harder to keep track of Gale as we found ourselves day sleeping more than anything. Then, after they'd been living with me for a few months, I woke up to find a surprise. It wasn't the screaming that woke me up this time, though. I woke up because Buddy was growling like a wild animal. He was crouched in front of the door, his ears back and his teeth bared, as he prepared to do battle with the door. I went to him, calling his name and trying to see what was happening, and that's when I heard Gale screaming. I'd expected Gale's panicked yells, but when I heard Celine's high-pitched distress as well, I knew something was up. I grabbed a flashlight and ran up the hallway toward their room, Buddy hot on my heels. Buddy and I came tearing up the hallway as we tried to see what was going on. Celine was against the far wall, her eyes roving around in disbelief. Gale was up and swinging the flashlight around again, yelling for whatever was here to get out. He looked like a crazy person, spit flying from his mouth as he went from corner to corner, trying to scare away whatever had drawn him out of sleep. Celine was absolutely terrified, but I was watching Buddy. Buddy was still growling, following Gale with his eyes as the man went corner to corner. "Gale," I called, but he ignored me as he kept hunting. "Gale!" I yelled after a few more soft calls, and then he finally looked up, eyes wide with confusion. "Come on, man, let's go somewhere a little less cramped," I offered, and as Celine got up to help me, the two of us led him into the living room, Buddy right behind us. He stopped in the doorway, though, and when I looked back to see what he was looking at, the big dog gave one final growl and then came trotting behind us. What the hell was going on here? I was dreaming of the foresters. I was sitting in the forest, the fog all around me, and I could see the lumpy shapes of the foresters as they shambled by. They were ghostly, their shapes undulating and shimmering in the smoke, but I couldn't seem to move despite my fear. They were inches away from me, their route taking them closer and closer with each one who passed. I'm worried about him. I looked around, thinking they might be talking to me. The foresters didn't usually talk, except for the one that had spoken to me, the one I wholeheartedly believed was Simon. I had never heard of anyone speaking to a forester. Mostly they just mumbled and shuffled, groaning a little from time to time, but they never speak. No. Now, however, I just couldn't make them stop. Why? He seems to be doing well. The words slipped out of their mouths like mud, and I couldn't help but notice how familiar they sounded. He's been so secretive lately. On the surface, he's the same old Jeff, but under it all, there's something he's not saying. I'm worried about him. I'm afraid he's in over his head. I tried to force myself out of the dream, tried to push myself back to reality, but it was no good. They just kept coming. It was like listening through a radio, the voices ebbing and flowing like static, and my mind refused to push out so I could assess what was happening. He's just trying to make a life for himself here. He's got interests. He's got friends. He's an adult. And we can't butt into his life the way we could when he was a child. One of them stopped, its shadow falling across me, and I looked up into a wooden face I recognized. It was my mother's face, a face carved into a stump by rough and unsure hands. It was like seeing the face of Christ in the burnt edges of toast or in the freshly poured surface of a sidewalk. It wasn't her face, but it absolutely was as well. We can't protect him from whatever he's gotten into. We just have to trust that we've equipped him for whatever it might be. She was joined by another forester, who looked exactly like the last one. The words came dribbling out of them in stereo, both of them speaking as beetles fell out of their mouths. It was awful, probably one of the worst things I've ever seen. As I watched, the beetles fell onto them and began to eat. They began to devour the wood that made up the creature's chest, and soon there was nothing but hollow creatures whose arms began to fall off and whose bodies collapsed into their legs. The beetles kept eating, devouring the head until nothing remained but the brief outline of my mother's face as it continued to speak. I came awake suddenly, unable to really process what I had seen, and that's when I realized what I was hearing was not something within a dream. I was back in my old bedroom, the bed feeling a little snug these days, and through a crack in the bedroom door I could hear my parents talking. Their bedroom was down the hall, not close, but close enough that sometimes I could hear the TV on at night. I didn't dare move. The slightest creak might alert them that I was awake, and I desperately wanted to know what they were talking about. I had a feeling they were talking about me. I'm worried for him. A father is allowed to worry, isn't he? It's Terry. I'm worried that he's going to get Jeff caught up in one of his schemes. My mother sighed. Terry is a respected figure in the community. You know that. Jeff could be so lucky to work with him. He's always doing something for the town. I rolled over ever so slowly. I found myself staring at the crack of light coming through the door, that small penetration of night light that seemed to signify that people were still awake. I hadn't done anything like this since I was a kid, just lying here and listening to them as they argued about what they could have done different so that Simon wasn't taken, or how they were going to afford funeral service for him, or how they were going to pay for therapy when I inevitably had a mental breakdown. And laying here, listening to them soothe each other, was as nostalgic as the posters on the wall or the 8-bit sound of my old video game. What's he doing for the town? My father said, almost resentfully. Most of what he's doing is tearing the town apart. I like Terry, he's a good guy, but he's always stirring things up. You know the mayor doesn't like him. The sheriff has had to speak with him several times about stirring up the council. I'm just afraid for Jeff. I know the man is his friend, and I don't want to get between them, but I don't want to see him go down with him. That's not all of it, my mother said, and I could almost hear her cross her arms. You're worried about why Gully came over today. That's not the only thing. I've heard that he's been asking a lot of questions about the woods, about beetles, about the woods themselves, about the foresters, and even about the heartwood. I know he's curious, but I think it might be more than that. He's been curious ever since... He paused as he tried to work up the nerve to name his lost son. Since Simon was taken. I'm worried that Terry is up to something, and that it's going to get both of them killed. The subtle shift of the springs on my mom's side of the bed made me think she had leaned forward a little bit. You don't think he's trying to do something to the foresters, do you? Or to the heartwood? I don't know, but I'm terrified that might be the case. It scares me. That's something that could get him in trouble with more than just the foresters. If he did something to the heart of the wood and the forest stopped growing back the way it does, then we could all be in a lot of trouble. That's the way the town lives lately, and I think they'd do a little more than running him out of town if he tanked the logging trade around here. There was silence for a moment, the two of them standing around with their thoughts as they both tried to come to some conclusion. What do we do? My mother asked, as if she couldn't quite come to it herself. Not much we can do. We just have to watch him. We just have to be vigilant. We just have to help him, if we can. Help him do something in the woods? She asked, almost skeptically. No, just if he tries to do something foolish. I don't know if I can. He's bigger than me, but if he got it in his head, I don't know if I could stop him. It's the only way. I'm not sure he could be stopped. Jeff's a good boy. I don't think it would ever come to that. Dad was quiet for a moment before finally saying, I hope so. I just hope we've raised him right, and he doesn't do anything irrevocable. The light from the room went off, and I heard Dad sit down on the mattress as he climbed into bed. Mom Springs groaned as she lay down, and within a few minutes the two of them were snoring away happily. I lay there for quite some time, trying to figure out what I would do if Dad tried to stop me. I couldn't put my hands on my dad. He was my dad, after all, but I couldn't let him stop me either. It was bigger than him and the Camber brothers and even the whole town. This was sacrifice disguised as tradition. This was the town's future, and it was at war with itself. This was our chance to change everything and bring Rayford into the future. I loved Dad. I loved the town despite its shadow, but I couldn't let either of them stand in my way. At the end of the day, things had to change, or we would be a town with nothing but trees. In the end, there would be no children to take, because a hopeless town bears no fruit. In the end, the foresters had hunted here for too long, and it was time for a change. I went to bed, thinking of all that, and fell back into a dream of foresters. Those were the only sorts of dreams that Rayford gave anyone. Dreams of horror and uncertainty. That's why things needed to be different, because staying the same was no longer an option. This was as much about the town as it was about Simon, and I had come to know and love many of the people here more than I had the last time I was here. The people of the town wouldn't thank me for what I was going to do, but I still had to do it. Otherwise, there would only be another generation of children living with that fear. McGhee had been a resident of Stragview for about 10 years. In that time, he'd seen all kinds of weird stuff. Ghosts, ladies, grass monsters, even zombie guards that had run the prison for a couple of months, but nothing like this. He'd been working in the kitchen for most of that time, dealing with rats and God only knew what else, but the weird shadows were something different. They were always at the corner of his eye, always standing where no one else could see them, and McGhee seemed to be the only one who ever noticed them. Shadows? Gary had asked when he mentioned them. Man, you must have got a bad batch of something. You're getting jumpy. McGhee knew he wasn't getting jumpy, though. Not after the cleanup a couple of nights ago. McGhee and a few others had been called down to detail the kitchen, something they did about once a month. If you didn't detail the kitchen at least 4 times a year, the bugs and the rats got so bad that there was no way you could pass a health inspection. It was one of the few times when they brought real chemicals in and machines were fixed so you could actually do some cleaning. It was something he actually enjoyed. It got him out of the dorm, and it got him some quiet time to actually think before he had to go back with all those people and all that noise. People didn't usually understand the noise, but when you were crammed into a dorm with 40 other people, sometimes more, a little bit of silence was sometimes a good thing, and McGhee looked for it when he could find it. He'd been cleaning in one of the back rooms that night, really sweeping at the roach turds and getting the mouse piss off the floor, when something had moved beside one of the shelves. He had looked, but it was gone. That was the way it always was. They would move too quickly for him to catch them, but as he turned back to what he was doing, that's when he saw what had been escaping him all this time. It was like a shadow. Its body vaguely human, but its teeth were very real. It had no eyes. It had no real definition. But those teeth were something else entirely. Those teeth could bite if you weren't careful. It was perched there on the edge of one of the metal grates that they often stacked things on top of. It was hunkered over like some grotesque gargoyle, just grinning at him from ear to ear. It might not have had eyes, but he could feel it watching him. It was focused intently on him. As he began to step backward, he could almost see its skin moving in anticipation. Mickey didn't know what to do. This was something very different from the usual weirdness. So he did the only thing he could think to do. He ran. The creature made a noise and jumped at him, but Mickey was already running full speed for the door. He didn't think he'd make it, didn't think there was any hope, but when he passed the threshold and the beast still hadn't devoured him, he slammed the door shut and promptly slipped on somebody's freshly mopped floor. Mickey went down hard, hitting his head as he saw stars, and when somebody looked down at him, he flinched back as if it might be that grinning monster that he'd seen only moments before. "Pascal, what the hell are you doing?" It was Officer Ramirez, the guy who usually led their detail. Officer Ramirez was an all-right guy, but he had a very narrow idea of horseplay and of goofing off. He sent guys to the box for less than that, and by the look on his face, he clearly thought that Mickey was goofing off. "There was something in the storeroom," Mickey sputtered, as he tried to defend himself. "There damn sure better be," Ramirez said, and Mickey saw him look through the little window in the door of the storage room. "Beans, rice, all that fresh produce, and not a bit of it missing thanks to your sticky fingers, Pascal." No, I mean like a wild animal or something. It tried to attack me. I barely made it out with my life." Ramirez rolled his eyes, but Mickey saw him pull out his big flashlight as if he meant to brain something with it. Mickey wanted to stop him from trying to go in there, but he knew that was a sure way to get sent to the box. As the door opened, Ramirez shone his light around before turning back to Mickey. "Seems your wild animal is—" Whoa! But then he jumped and cursed as a big rat scampered by his foot and escaped the storeroom. He nearly lost his balance on the wet floor, but he grabbed the door frame and managed to stay standing. The other inmates chuckled a little, but Mickey was watching something behind Ramirez. He was watching the shadow with the wide grin as it sank into the wall between two shelves. "Fair enough," Ramirez said, chuckling a little himself. "That's the biggest one I've seen in a little while. You probably spooked me too. All right, everybody back to work. This kitchen ain't gonna clean itself." They all got back to work, but Mickey tried not to be too far away from anyone for the rest of the evening. If that smiling shadow came back again, he didn't want to have to face it alone. There had never been any shortage of company when it came to rounds, but lately, nighttime seemed to be the worst time to be out on the floor. Garcia had been here for a couple of months, part of the new guard, and you never quite got used to what was going on in the prison. The place was old, one of the oldest prisons he'd ever seen, and the ghosts here were pretty thick. Nobody talked about them. Everybody was a little bit afraid to acknowledge them, but it was hard not to see them. They were everywhere, and they were nowhere at the same time. They walked the floors with you. They went to chow with you. They were there when you did your paperwork, and they waited for you at the gate when you left so they could follow you back to the dorm when you came back in. Lately, however, Garcia had noticed a change in the spirits. It started a couple of weeks ago when he was doing a round. It was past midnight, and most of the inmates in F-dorm were already asleep. The sounds of snoring mingled well with the low talk that was going on. But when he came to cell 111 on Wing 4, he stopped and looked in on the occupant. He couldn't have said why. It was just the way the man was sitting seemed very strange, and he had been taught to pay attention to strangeness. The guy was sitting on the toilet, arms by his side, and his head nearly between his knees. Garcia was afraid that he had killed himself for a moment, something that happened every now and again, and he knocked on the window and asked the guy if he was okay. The guy never stirred, never twitched, and Garcia banged on the glass a little harder. He had lifted his radio to call the door, hoping that Smith was awake up there, and that's when the guy finally moved. Garcia hadn't noticed until he turned, but he wasn't wearing the usual uniform you saw in the inmates. He had thought the shadows in the cell were deep enough that he had missed it, but whoever it was seemed to be made of shadows. His arms were as black as a frostbite victim. His legs almost seemed to move by themselves in the darkness. Not like spasms, more like ripples on a pond. He turned to look at Garcia, and when he did, the officer had the sinking fear that he didn't have any eyes. What he did have was a mouthful of pearly white teeth, and as he smiled, Garcia realized the teeth were too big for a normal mouth. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both of them dumbstruck by the other. Then suddenly, the inmate sprang off the toilet and began to bounce around the room like a crazy person. He leaped around like a toad and seemed to stick to the walls as he banged and clattered. Underneath it all, Garcia thought he heard a low and sinister chuckling, and it made his skin crawl. He told the inmate to sit down and stop trying to hurt himself, but whoever it was, they continued to jump around and bang and make noise until even some of the inmates on the quad had begun to yell about being quiet after lights out and shutting the hell up because they were trying to sleep. Garcia lifted the radio to his mouth and called for backup. "Officer Garcia to inside security. I have an aggressive inmate in Quad 4, Cell 111. I'm going to need some backup. I think narcotics might be involved." He was pretty proud of that radio traffic at the time. It had been calm, precise, and full of useful information. Inside security said they'd be on their way, and about a minute before they got there, the guy finally calmed down and just stood in the middle of the cell. Garcia couldn't swear that he was looking at him, but he could also feel those eyes as they bore into him. Garcia turned as he heard boots coming in the quad, and when he looked back at the cell door as Smith rolled it open, he blinked. The guy wasn't standing in the middle of the cell anymore. As the lights came on and the sounds of sleepy inmates grumbling around him began to rise in volume, he realized the cell was empty. Holmes, the guy working Security 9 that night, put his hands on his hips and looked at Garcia like the kid had been playing some kind of joke. "Care to explain where your disruptive, high inmate is?" I swear to you," Garcia said as he walked into the cell and started looking around. He was here. He was sitting on the toilet. I thought he might be dead. Then all of a sudden, he looks at me with this creepy smile and then just starts bouncing off the walls. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. He was right there." Holmes gave him a skeptical look, but then Garcia got some backup from an unexpected place. "He ain't kidding, boss," said the inmate in the cell next to 111. "We all heard it. He was yelling and raving and just making a lot of racket. I don't know where he went, but he was noisy right up until you guys got here." Holmes and the other yard officers told Garcia to get some rest and stop making up stories, but Garcia knew what he had seen. The ghosts of the prison were active tonight, and they had never looked so happy. Holmes let the smoke off his cigarette rise up before his eyes. It had been a long night, and it wasn't over just yet. "I swear," Hedman said, "these rookies are getting jumpier and jumpier every year. Can you believe Garcia called us to look into an empty cell? What a dumbass." "Didn't you spray a cat in a garbage can a couple of years ago?" Maury asked as he took a puff off his cigarillo. Hedman grimaced. "He surprised me. That's completely different." The three of them laughed about it, and their combined smoke wafted up into the sky. It was around 2 a.m., and the fog had started rolling in. It was going to make pulling food service a real pain in the ass, but Holmes was pretty experienced at it. He'd get them pulled out, he'd get them sent to chow, and when the sun come up, he'd go home and get some sleep. It was just another day on the yard. "Holmes!" came a cry from the captain's office. Holmes put his cigarette out and stuck his head into the office. "Yeah, Cap." Have you got those food service guys up and at 'em yet? Just about to go get 'em, Holmes said with a grimace. Are you just about to get your guys down a stun fence and an exterior check as well? Captain asked, as Holmes blew out in disgust. He'd completely forgotten they had stun fence tonight. Yeah, we'll have it done before breakfast. Good boy, get it done. It was easy for Cap to toss out orders while he sat in his office and did God knows what, but Holmes knew it would do no good to argue with him. Headman, go get stun fence. Maury, go do external. And what are you going to do? Headman asked, as he clamped his smoke between his teeth. He was technically Security 9 Alpha, but he was so cocky that Holmes often wondered why he put up with his questions. Duh, I'm going to go get food service. Get it done so we can start feeding on time. The two nodded and headed off to their various tasks, as Holmes headed for B-Dorm so he could get the troops up and in the kitchen. The fog had gotten really thick, thicker than he had ever remembered seeing it, and he jokingly thought that it would be easy to get lost out there. He bet that it would be impossible to see the dorm, if much more of it rolled in. He could see the lights of B-Dorm through the fog as he headed for it, and it shouldn't have taken him more than about a minute to get there. It was less than 100 steps from the captain's office to the dorm where the food service lived, but as the fog got thicker around him, he suddenly began to wonder if he was alone out there. Through the fog, he could see shadows moving, and it felt like people were lurking not far away from him. Hello? Holmes called out, spinning around as he noticed another shadow loping in his periphery. No sooner had he turned than he saw another, and as he spun to face it, there was another. Pretty soon he seemed to be surrounded, and they were all moving like predators through the fog. One of them stopped suddenly, turning its head to look at him, and as it smiled, he saw a mouthful of teeth that were too large for a human. Hadn't Garcia said that he saw one of them smiling at him? Hadn't others said that they'd seen smiling shadows in the quads? Suddenly he seemed to be surrounded by these smiling shadows, and when the one facing him turned to run at him, Holmes found himself running instead. He didn't know where he was going, but suddenly he had to get away from this thing. If it got him, biting him was probably the least of his worries. When he ran into the side of the captain's office, he fell on the pavement and saw stars that had nothing to do with the night sky. What the hell? A voice from inside said, and pretty soon he was looking up at the captain as he stood over him. Holmes, what's gotten into you? Are you okay? He helped up his Security 9, and as Holmes looked around for the things that had been chasing him, the captain tensed and seemed to glance around as well. What are you looking for? Did something happen? As his breathing finally came under control, Holmes had to face the fact that whatever had happened, it was over now. No, not over, but finished for now. I must have gotten turned around in the fog, he said as he got his bearings. Must have gotten spooked, that's all. The captain smiled and patted him on the shoulder. It's easy to do. After all, Stragview's a spooky place. Holmes agreed, and after he got his bearings, he headed back towards B-Dorm. Spooky shadows or not, the breakfast still had to come out on time, and Holmes wasn't going to be the reason that it didn't. I could see them following me, and decided to lead them away from the crowd before they attacked. The park was doing its summer flower show, and we were packed with families and summer programs and curious people who just wanted to come and see all the beauty on display. The people following me stood out like broken fingers, though they probably thought they were being subtle. There was a time they would have slipped right past me. There was a time that I wouldn't have noticed them until it was too late. But I'd been training and working with the court for so long that I could pick out creatures of Fae from those who made the middle plane their home. These three had thrown up better veils than the last group, but I could still tell who they were. Their outlines shimmered slightly. Their shapes were not as solid as they should be. and when the sun hit them just right, I could see their armor and their weapons. They were poorly disguised, but when you only have to blend in with mortals, then I suppose your disguise doesn't have to be particularly expert. I led them down a small back road between the farm area and the lily pond. The farm was displaying summer vegetables right now, squashes and watermelons and tomatoes, and they were making a killing selling watermelons of every shape and size. Square, circle, I'd even seen a few that I'd have to pull out a math book to know the names of. The concession stand had been juicing them and making smoothies out of them for the last couple of weeks, and the park was flourishing under such incomes. The lily pond was equally as popular. The sculptures on display there were wooden beings drawn up from the ground themselves, and more than a few of them looked like people who had gone missing in the park, though no one had realized it yet. I suspected that wasn't an accident, but at that point, I was only interested in the go-between between the two. I turned suddenly, letting my glamour drop, and putting a hand on my sword as I faced the three fae who had been tailing me. "Is there something I can help you with? You seem very interested in me, so I figured I'd give you a private audience." One of them separated from the others, a tall elf who dropped his glamour and let me see his armor as he drew two swords off his belt. "In the name of the Queen, we've come to take you." I grinned and pulled my broadsword off my back. "In the name of the Queen, you will try." The other two drew their swords no less smoothly, but they had barely cleared their sheaths by the time the lead elf was in front of me. They were all elves, their ears and their willowy bodies a dead giveaway, and I knew from experience that elves were quick and cunning. I met his sword with mine, and he seemed surprised when I stepped forward and put a boot in his gut. He almost got out of the way, almost, and my heel caught him in the hip and staggered him back a little. I took advantage and swiped my sword across his and sent it spinning away. The other two were on me fairly quickly, short swords out and swinging in fast. I deflected one off a raised forearm, taking the other on my sword before turning and sending my gauntlet crashing into the shoulder of the left one. He shied away from it, but it still sent him spinning from the blow. The other I pushed back and let the full power of my mantle wash over me. The first elf had drawn a dagger and come charging at me, and I sidestepped and put the flat of the blade against the back of his head. He went down hard in a heap, and I turned and dealt one of the remaining ones a backhand across the face. He slammed into a nearby tree, coughing and sputtering as he tried to get his breath, and when I grabbed the third by the front of his armor and put the point of my blade against his throat, I screamed in his face loud enough that the crowds probably heard me. "Yield, or the gnomes will be cleaning your blood off the paving stones." He put his hands up and told me I had won, and when the old man came out laughing and clapping, I shook my head and turned to give him my full attention. Aurelius Vanderhorn no longer bothered to appear to me as a stooped-backed old man. He always stood tall and proud, a cane brought with him more for decoration than anything, and his green robe swept the ground as he walked. He had silver hair and a pair of tiny little gold spectacles that he perched on his nose. He didn't look a day over 60, and it was hard to believe that this man had led crusaders into the Holy Land. He had a sword at his hip that looked like a twin to my own, and he was smiling as he approached me. "Well done, boy. You're lucky you're not cleaning these guys up off the concrete," I said, trying to keep the bite out of my voice. Aurelius only shrugged. "What's the point of a training exercise if you know it's coming? I knew they would provide you with enough challenge to make it worth your while." I'd recognized their armor the second they took their cloaks off, but it hadn't been any real relief either. I seemed to live constantly under the idea that Queen Titania might grow tired of me and my lady and decide it was time to take us off the field. We had given her no reason to, but her moods seemed to be as fickle as most fae creatures. It didn't help that I still believed we were living with her executioner every day. Mr. Vanderhorn had been very complimentary. He had been very open about how well my training was going. But that didn't mean that I trusted him any further than I could throw him. I liked the man, but he could still just as easily be the end of me. "No notes," Mr. Vanderhorn said, as he stepped close to the four of us, "except that you might want to watch out for kicks." He told the one who had drawn the two swords. "I could have seen that coming from a mile away." "Apologies," the elf said as he rubbed at his hip. "It's not a maneuver that I'm familiar with." "I suppose not," Mr. Vanderhorn said with a chuckle. "Not a lot of elves out there kicking. Most of the time it's blades and bows, and not a lot else. I do appreciate your restraint," he said, turning back to me, "though I suppose if you hadn't recognized them, they might be little gobbets on the ground right now." Two of them would have been. The third I'd have kept for interrogation. Before I levy accusations at whatever commands them, I want to know exactly who they are and who commands them. Aurelius nodded. "It's always good to have your ducks in a row before you go accusing creatures that could crush you with an errant thought. Your training is going well, boy. I'm impressed. Some of it's the mantle, but a lot of it's you. You absorb the training like a sponge, and it's a breath of fresh air to work with someone who's so receptive." The two of us walked away, leaving the three elves to collect themselves as Aurelius talked over strategy and combat style. This had always been his way. He would teach a lesson, then he would critique your form, then he would fix you so he didn't have to critique you again. He had had to critique me a second time more than once, but not in quite some time. I found that I enjoyed his lessons, and it was nice to be able to better serve the court and my lady. "Always remember, no matter where you are, an attack could come at any time. Court politics are often very strange, and they can shift at a moment's notice. Today's ally could be tomorrow's enemy. I was literally attacked by a man I'd been drinking with only an hour before. Come to find out, Queen Titania had offered his matriarch a thinly veiled insult over dinner, and the two of us were crossing blades before dessert. He was bleeding out before my tart had time to cool. But that's the nature of working with the court. Things move slowly sometimes, like glaciers forming, and then other times it's hot and fast and without warning. You have to be prepared for such things if you're going to last. It's why they make humans their knights, more often than not." "Because we burn out quick?" I asked, not really understanding. "Because we're flexible, boy. Humans are like metal, capable of bending under great heat and being reformed. Fae have had millennia to create themselves, and most of them are rigid and immovable. You cannot take a Fae who's been a sculptor or a houndmaster and make him into a summer knight. He would break, or he would simply refuse and be struck down out of hand. Even if forced, he would make a poor proxy. It's best to find someone valuable, someone new. It's why humans have so often been brought into this part. It's why so many of us become Fae, such as we can." "Did you?" I asked. It wasn't the question I wanted to ask. I really wanted to learn more about becoming a Fae, but it seemed to be the question that my mind settled on. Aurelius laughed. "No, boy. I'm as human as you. I just don't seem to die. The Queen locked me in at a certain point, and now I'm simply adrift in time. I cannot age. I will not die. Not as long as I am useful to her. Sometimes, if I fail her, she lets me glimpse what life would be like if this gift were suddenly taken away. I have felt what it would be like to be many times 100 years old, and I'm not in any great hurry to lose the Queen's favor. I know that one day I will die. A foe will get the better of me, or the Queen will grow tired of me, but for now I am her loyal servant, and she has tasks for me yet. It is the same with you. So long as you hold the mantle, you will be an extension of summer. Once your time has passed, or once you have no more usefulness, you will die. It is the nature of the seasons. It is the way of things." I thought about that as we walked among the crowd that had come to look at the flowers. It was on my mind as I came back into the security shed, imagining what it would be like to age several hundred years all at once. "Saw your fight," Randy said as he adjusted his hooves on the desk. "It was pretty incredible." "Yeah, I'm getting pretty good with my swordsmanship. Woe be to the first burglar who decides to break into this place." Randy laughed and hit a button on the remote to zoom in on one of the cameras near the front. "I always assumed that me and the boys would take on any kind of vagrant or burglar or ne'er-do-well that came in. Throwing a freaking knight at him seems kind of overkill. You'd probably turn him into some kind of slurry." I was watching the camera he had zoomed in on, and that was the only reason I saw the man in the long cloak. He was fuzzy around the edges, so it probably wasn't what he was wearing where people could see it. But I could see the voluminous gray cloak as it hung off of him, and the weird mask that was covering his face. He was tall, probably closer to 7 feet than 6 feet, and he was powerfully built under all that gray. I could see the vague outline of a sword under the edge, and he walked right through the gates as people stepped out of his way without realizing why. The ticket taker made note of him, and I saw the red button light up on the screen as he passed into the park. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know. He's been skulking around for a while now. I caught him canvassing the wall about an hour ago. He's been slowly making his way from one corner of the park to the other. He just came inside, and I was waiting for him to step into the trap before making a scene." Randy hit another button, and I could see the guy walking through the park as he avoided the crowd. I didn't think anyone could actually see him, and they seemed to just be stepping out of his way on instinct. The Brandylow certainly saw him. They all kept smiling at the crowd, but I could see them looking uncomfortable as they tracked him. He was heading for the lily pond, and I decided to head him off before he could get up to any trouble. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know what he was about, but I decided that it might be best to catch him and find out. "Do you want me to scramble some guys to help you?" I had to think about that for a minute, not really sure that I wanted anyone getting hurt on my behalf. If I couldn't take this guy, there wasn't a lot of chance that the Brandylow were going to be able to swarm him. It might take the forest guardians we had in the grove to bring him down. But I mostly just wanted to find out who he was. Maybe he was just curious and he didn't mean us any harm. I didn't really believe it, not given how he was dressed, but I suppose anything was possible. "Tell some of the guys to make a perimeter around him. Don't intercept him and don't get in his way, but just be smart and keep track of him. I'm going to meet him at the lily pond." "Sounds good," Randy said as he picked up his walkie and started giving people orders. I tapped into the mantle and sort of stepped out of sync for a minute. It's hard to describe. It's not like time travel. It's not even like super speed. It's more like teleporting or phasing through distance. I don't know if that's what it is, but it's the closest I can come to it. Suddenly I was moving a lot quicker than I thought possible, and the people around me were kind of blurring. I went through the farmland, taking a similar but opposing route to his, and managed to beat him to the lily pond. I saw some of the security guys moving guests away from it, telling them that they needed to evacuate the area because they were doing maintenance here. Some of them grumbled, but a lot of them went on. The lily pond was cool and all, but it wasn't our biggest drawing attraction. When he stepped into the area, it was just the two of us. I had my hand on my sword, but I was keeping it casual as I turned to give him what I hoped was a friendly smile. "I just wanted to see who you were and what you were doing here. I noticed the regular people can't see you, so You must be of Fae. Let's talk. What is it I can help you with? He didn't say anything. He just stared at me through the eye holes of that weird metal mask, and I could suddenly hear it rasping out breath. It was like someone with pneumonia trying to breathe, and it made me grit my teeth in shared discomfort the longer it went on. Are you from the court? Do you have a message of some sort? I have no intention of hurting you, not unless you make me, and I really just want to see what's going on. This is our place, and if you're here to do mischief, then I'd sooner send you on your way than have you hurt. It still said nothing, but when its sword came out, it sounded like metal drawn over frozen chain-link fence. I winced at the sound, but I still brought my own blade out as I began to circle him. The cloak had come undone, and I could now see that it was a tall, broad man dressed in soft grays and a pair of hiking boots. He was unarmored, but that didn't really mean anything. He could appear to be unarmored whenever he felt like it, so could I, but it didn't mean that my glamour wasn't as hard as steel. This doesn't have to end in violence. You just have to throw your sword down and walk away. If you want to talk, we can talk, but if you decide to... He lunged in one fluid motion, and it was the smoothest thing I had ever seen. It was like he slid across the ground, the sword coming out in a high, tight arc, and it nearly took my breath away. My hands moved out of instinct, my training kicking in as my own blade caught his. It was a very near thing. A second longer, and I'd have been cut in half. I know how that sounds, but I really believe it. I saw frost on my own blade before he moved away a step, and I could tell that whatever the sword was, it was fairy make as well. I didn't bother trying to speak to him again. We were beyond words now. I tapped into the mantle and went to work. He was quick, and I couldn't tell if he was tapping into his own power of some kind or if that was just him. He moved like a serpent, quick and precise and full of venom. I put blow after blow away, my own slapped contemptuously aside as if they were nothing but insult. The two of us fought there by the pond, and it was the second most fearful battle of my life. It couldn't hold a candle to how I had gained the mantle of summer, but it was the smallest I'd felt in a long time. The man put me aside so effortlessly, so needlessly, that I thought for sure he was playing with me. Was this another of Mr. Vanderhorn's tests? Had this man been sent to test my mettle? I didn't even see it when the leg came out, but as I fell to my back, I knew that I'd been beaten. I crashed to the ground like a fallen star, my sword going wide, and I saw the final blow coming down after me. I closed my eyes, my life already at an end, and I was just praying that Mr. Vanderhorn would be able to defend the lady if she was who he was truly here to kill. I looked up as an angry metal screamed off ice, and I could see that Aurelius Vanderhorn had put himself between the final blow and me. He had caught it on his sword, the blade sliding down to bury in the concrete an inch from my hip, and he and the warrior were glaring at each other as they crossed swords. "What is the meaning of this? Why would you come here? Your queen has no power in this place, so why are you here?" The masked warrior stood up, sword held at the ready, but defensively rather than offensively. When they spoke, their voice was like thick mud, but there was a distinct lightness to it. There was cruelty there that I had never heard before, something that I believe Queen Mab would have approved of. "I heard there was a new summer knight, and that he might be getting a little big for his britches. I came to see if he lived up to the hype. But I must say I am disappointed. Is this the best you've got, old man? You'll be put out to pasture soon if this is the best you can do when it comes to training knights." Aurelius did not rise to the insult. He put his sword away and spread his arms as he blocked me from the knight. "Begone! You are not welcome here. If you persist, I will bring your queen into this." The knight laughed, and it was a hollow sound inside the mask. "What makes you think she doesn't know I'm here?" Aurelius chuffed a laugh. "Your queen is a vindictive, spiteful bitch, but there is order to what she does. She would not send you to kill Titania's knight without reason, and as far as I am aware, no one has offered Queen Mab a slight of any sort. Return to your queen, and vex me no more, before I send you back to her in pieces." The masked warrior turned its face to me and inclined its head before disappearing back the way it had come. I started to get up, wanting to make sure the knight left, but Aurelius put a hand out to stop me. "She will go. She has erred, and she knows that if I call upon her queen, she will be in trouble." "She?" I asked. Then you know her?" Aurelius looked at me steadily, nodding briskly, as he bent down to pick up my sword and help me to my feet. "That is Liliana of the Winter Court. She is Queen Mab's Winter Knight." "Son, you've got to slow down a little bit. You're going to hurt yourself." The sound of weights had become pretty common in the back area of the botanical garden. I knew that a lot of what I could do had nothing to do with the size of my muscles, but it was a throwback to my human days. I had decided that getting in shape, or at least putting on a lot of muscle mass, would probably make me a little more intimidating to the monsters that seemed to find their way into my home. It had been about 2 weeks since the winter night had come in and stomped my face flat, and it was something I didn't want to see happen again. The fact that it was a woman had absolutely nothing to do with it. I know what you guys are thinking, but it didn't. I'm absolutely secure in my masculinity. Promise. Mr. Vanderhorn was more than happy to train me in the sword or the bow or any number of other weapons, but he scoffed openly at the weights and the training that filled the space in between my own sessions. I had asked him to come lifting with me, wanting someone to spot me more than anything, and he had told me that the process would be completely pointless, no matter how much I did it. "The power isn't in your arms. It's not in your back. It's not in your legs. It's in your head. Your power comes from your connection to the court, from your ability to tap in and manipulate it. You can look as muscular as you like, but it's not going to help you at all when it comes to fighting the creatures that come knocking at your door." As if to demonstrate this, he had picked up a 500-pound barbell and balanced it easily on one finger. He laughed when I looked amused, and I supposed I had only myself to blame. I got so used to seeing him as a frail old man that I suppose I kept forgetting his connection to the court and to his own power. "I could easily lift twice that amount of weight on both fingers. My appearance is what I choose it to be, and it matters very little." No, most of his concern came from not properly giving myself time to recover. I was lifting and training and fighting some new threat every day, and Mr. Vanderhorn was worried that I would overdo it. I was a creature of Fae now, as much as I could be, but my muscles, my bones, and my limits were still very much human. I had a little extra kaboom in the tank, thanks to being a brandy-low and a knight, but I could still do myself harm and be out of commission for a while. He stressed this to me, and I had understood what he was talking about, but I still wanted to continue doing the weight training. I was a child of the early 2000s, and when you wanted to get in shape, it always came down to getting buff. A lot of my questions lately had been centered around thwarting my new enemy, and I could already tell that Aurelius was getting a little put out by my sudden and intense interest in the winter night. He was beginning to branch out a lot in his training, helping me perfect using lances and shields and things that might come in handy in a battlefield situation. And as I tied it all back to my skirmishes with the winter champion, he would roll his eyes and tell me that, more often than not, I needed to be more concerned about myself and the other Fae I might meet. If you take your training seriously, then there shouldn't be an opponent alive that you can't beat. The real problem is going to be overcoming your own doubt. You're a fine warrior, a very talented knight, and you have to understand that before you can advance much farther. The Winter Knight is not your enemy. The Winter Knight is much like you in many ways. She is an extension of her queen, and she does her bidding without fail. If you are to defeat her, you must understand that. Much like you, she's a tool, someone who fulfills a purpose, and that's all she will ever be. I thought about that as Aurelius went back to whatever filled his days, and I went back to my weights. I carried it with me as I walked around the botanical garden that day, not really sure what I meant to do with any of it. The winter night was a threat, that much was certain, but Mr. Vanderhorn had been right. He was an extension of the Queen's power, and if the night had come after me, then it meant I had somehow angered the Queen of Air and Darkness. That did not bode well. Queen Mab had a lot of power, though it was less impressive during these hot months while Queen Titania held sway. This could have been simply a way to remind me that I was still mortal, and to keep me from getting lofty ideas about myself. This could have also just been one knight coming to challenge another. Mr. Vanderhorn said that wasn't uncommon, but the queens tried to keep a firm grasp on their pawns so that they didn't have to replace them quite so often. Titania hadn't had a firm grip on her last summer night, so why should I expect more control from winter? My path took me to the lily pond, and when I rolled up to find that the lady was staring back at me, I realized I'd been wool gathering. She realized it too and told her helpers to take 5 as she asked me to go for a walk. I agreed right away. I had never and would never refuse my lady. I know your mind is full of doubts lately. I can feel it like a hive of bees, but you cannot let doubt cloud your judgment. You are my knight, and a knight of summer, and you must remember that yours is a very important job. I nodded, walking along beside her like a kid being told to calm down. I guess I'm just worried. I'm worried that when the time comes, my lady, I will fail you. She laughed, and it was the most musical thing I had ever heard. My lady's laughter never ceased to put me at ease. You could never fail me. You are my friend and my champion, and you will always be cherished in my eyes. Never doubt yourself. I never doubt my love for you. I walked away from our talk feeling a little lighter, but my thoughts followed close behind as I tried to make it all line up just right. When the attack came that day, I was spoiling for a fight. I had found my way into the security office just before dusk, and Randy was glad to see me. I got 3 weirdos making their way toward the grove. I think they might be some of those guys from your neck of the woods. I smiled as I nodded, ready to work some of my aggression out on today's training dummies, and my steps quickened as I made my way to the grove. The grove now held less than 20 of the forest guardians that we had called up, and it was one of the largest collections in North America. The 3 intruders stood out like sore thumbs among them, and as I made my presence known to the 3 figures, they shed their disguises, and I could see that I was in for a scrap. They were no elves, no fairy creatures capable of elegant disguises. As the clothes came off, I could see 3 large and angry-looking specimens. Their skin was green and brown and covered with strange knobby bits. Their faces were pinched, their noses were long, and the hair on their head looked more like moss than anything. Their eyes narrowed, and they bore wicked little teeth at me as they pulled at the limbs on the trees and prepared for battle. The smallest of them was twice my size, and I sighed at Aurelius and his need to exacerbate my training. They were forest trolls, not the biggest of their breed, but certainly not the smallest, and as the limbs came free of the ancient old specimens, they popped them against their hands as they tested their strength. "Queen says we gotta put you down," one of them said, and his English was surprisingly good for someone who had spent most of his life in the deeper parts of the forest. "Sounds good to me," I said, as I drew my sword and got ready to fight. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of thinking that day, and I was really looking forward to having something to hit. The one who had spoken lunged at me with a club about as big around as my leg. I caught it on the blade and put it aside, taking his arm off below the elbow as I did so. He yelled and pulled back, green ichor beginning to dribble from the wound. I knew it wouldn't be gone for long. Trolls had a nasty habit of regeneration, and I turned to the others as I tried to put them down before their friend was back and in the fray. 2 trolls would be enough of a pain. 3 would be nearly impossible. The other 2 lunged in, clubs swinging, and I cut one of them down at the knee and watched him fall to the ground in a heap. The second managed to land a blow on the back that should have broken my spine, but my armor and my mantle absorbed it, and when I turned, it was to take his hand off and feel the wind rush by as his club hit the ground. He looked at the club stupidly, clearly expecting that it should still be in a hand that was also down on the ground. But I didn't let him distract me as I spun back to the first one. He was regrowing the arm at an alarming speed, and as he swung a fist at me, I split it right down the middle up to the elbow. He yelled and carried on, so I did him a favor and took the useless arm off before taking off the new one as well. His leg came next. Then another fist caught me in the side of the head, and I staggered a little as I turned to meet it. My neck hurt, my ear rang, but my turn as I struck was no less sure. When he tried to swing again, I took his hand off, then his arm at the shoulder. By now, some of the fight had gone out of them. One of them was little more than stumps growing quickly into limbs again, and the others were back on their various appendages. They were beaten down, but they were ready to keep going. Trolls were hardy, they were tenacious, but I knew how to make them less eager. I called summer fire to my hand, and the trolls seemed a little less eager to fight against that. Hold on, Governor. Let's not get crazy. You win. The old man only employed us to test you. We weren't actually trying to hurt you." "I hope that's a lie," I said, fire still burning in my hand, "because if the old man told you to test me and you went easy on me, then he's going to do a hell of a lot worse to you than I will." They were already returning to their old selves, limbs regenerating, bodies mostly healed, and all of them put up their hands as they slowly backed away and began to disappear into the depths of the grove. "Like I said, just a test. You got the better of us. We sure are sorry for any trouble we might have caused." The lead troll was already disappearing, and I put my sword away as I let the fire dissipate from my hand. Had these trolls been as powerful as the winter night? I doubted it, but it made me wonder what my old teacher might cook up next. A giant, a dragon, some kind of demigod for me to test myself against. I headed back into the park, my stride a little more confident than it had been all day. I suppose I'd just have to find out. Friday arrived by way of an alarm that went off at 4:30 in the morning. Normally, Grandpa would have woken me up and told me to shake a leg because we were burning dark hours before daylight. But Grandpa had been in bed for the last 2 days. It started Tuesday when I came to give him dinner and found him slumped over one of his books. I thought he was just asleep, but his breathing was irregular when I picked him up, and I wheeled out an oxygen tank that I had been hoping not to use and hooked him up. Grandpa had needed oxygen on and off for the last year, though he had mostly only needed it for emergencies. He came to after a few minutes and told me he had gotten sleepy while he was going over something. I put him to bed and told him to let me know if he needed anything. Every time I've checked on him for the last 2 days, he's been lying in bed, and he's mostly been sleeping. I want to think that he's trying to marshal his strength for the hike, but I was honestly pretty sure I might find him dead when I went to get him up. I dreaded that for the past 2 days, just coming in to find that he had passed in his sleep. As I opened the door and whispered to him today, however, I was in for a little bit of a surprise. Grandpa still had the oxygen, but he was dressed in flannel and blue jeans, though he had traded his hiking boots for a pair of soft slippers. Grandpa had become more of a realist as time went on, and he knew there was going to be no hiking to the clearing on his own accord. He might start out moving, but I would probably have to carry him most of the way. He looked up and smiled at me as he saw me come in, pointing to a big rucksack that I had been working on for the last couple of days. "I made sure that the harness was in place," he said, as he got shakily to his feet. "I think it's as ready as it's ever gonna be. Let's get a move on, kid. I want to get there before the old ghoul figures out what we're up to." He didn't so much say it as he wheezed it. Grandpa's speech had been getting more and more difficult to understand, and he just seemed to run out of breath so easily these days. The travois that we had rigged up had a spot for the oxygen tank, something I'd added yesterday, and as I eased him into it and tested the straps, he looked like one of those Indian kids who rides around on their mother's back, the kind of thing you see in old museum photos sometimes. "Not a very dignified way to head into the woods," he said with a little cough. "But I suppose beggars can't be choosers." I carried him to the back porch, making sure that the straps fit as well as they could, and then I headed out on our hike as the sun began to peek over the horizon. We hadn't gone very far into the woods when I heard a light brush of footsteps across the uneven ground ahead of us. Even a year ago, I wouldn't have been able to pick out Glimmer as she crept through the woods, but now her steps were as familiar to me as her laughter. I turned to see her lurking not too far away, and I smiled as I waved her over. "You don't have to come with us. I know you don't do well in the sunlight, and I know you need your rest."
"I wouldn't miss it for the world. I want to be with you as you undertake this journey. I want to see him into the clearing."
The way she said it made me a little uneasy, but I put it off as nerves. Grandpa and Glimmer had met a few times before his bout of extended sleep, though they seemed a little private about what they were talking about. I wasn't jealous or worried about it, but it seemed odd that they would leave me out of their discussion. Grandpa and I had apparently had a lot of secrets lately, and not being included made me feel like he was still keeping something back. For Glimmer's part, she wouldn't say what the old man was planning.
It was something he wanted to discuss only with me. He made me swear to not talk about it until later. He wants to be sure that it will work before he says more.
She had looked sad in those moments, sad and a little unsure of herself. I'd started to ask questions before she shook her head and covered my mouth with a hand.
All will be clear soon enough, my love. Stay the course and trust in Fisher.
We had just set off again when I heard a less practiced foot come thundering into the woods. I knew who it was, but I had honestly expected that he would miss us. John and I had become very close friends in the short time that we had known each other, but I knew that John was more of a night owl than a morning person. This was usually when he was getting off to go to bed, and he had said it was unlikely that he could get someone to cover for him, so he could meet us before our hike. Not only had he managed it, but he had a backpack of his own, and seemed to be running to catch up. Sorry, I didn't think he was going to get there in time. David's a great guy, but his time management skills leave a lot to be desired. I put a hand on his shoulder, glad to see him, but also a little worried. Glimmer was one thing, but I didn't want to involve John in this if I didn't have to. I didn't think that the Weldergeist would hurt any of us, but with creatures like this, you really never knew. If he found us trying to conceal Grandpa in the woods, he could become very upset, and I didn't need any blowback from this, hitting my friends. It's not too late, John. I know you've been up all night. You can still go to bed. I won't hold it against you. John shook his head and gave me a thumbs up. Nope, I want to go with you guys. I want to be there to make sure everything goes okay. The orderly has told me I might have some kind of sway with the Weldergeist anyway, so if things go bad, maybe I can stall him or convince him to turn away. Also, I haven't hiked in a while, and it could be fun. I doubted that any of this was going to be particularly fun, but I nodded and told him to come along with us. He fell in step, and the four of us headed into the unknown together. It's a nice day for it, John said, his boots squeaking a little as he walked. I'm not sure there is such a thing as a nice day for this, I said distractedly. John laughed. I can't imagine trying to make a trip like this at night. Sounds like a great way to break a leg. I expected Grandpa to chime in with something, but he was surprisingly quiet on the trip there. He sat strapped to my back as I walked, his wheezing the only thing to indicate that he hadn't suddenly passed on. And after a little more small talk from the three of us, I turned my head and asked if he was okay. Fine, he said, without hesitation or enthusiasm. What are you thinking about, Gramps? Seems pretty heavy, whatever it is. Grandpa was quiet for a moment, seeming to collect his thoughts as the forest woke up around us. It was early, about an hour after dawn now, but you could still hear birds just lifting their wings off their faces, squirrels disentangling themselves from holes as they began looking for food, and the sound of larger animals as they went to look for their daily meal or find safer accommodations for sleep later. As the minutes stretched on and Grandpa still hadn't answered me, I began to think I wasn't going to get one. He might go the whole way without some kind of Grandpa lecture or a story about a time that was similar, but when he began to speak in that wheezing voice that had become normal for him, I was surprised at the depth of his thoughts. I was just thinking how little the forest has changed since I was a kid. I recognize the trees that I've passed so many times before. I recognize the rocks along the path, the way the stream sets between the banks. But I wonder what it must look like to them." "To them?" I asked, not really understanding. "To the trees. What must all of this look like to them? What does time's progression look like for a tree? They've seen me as a kid in short pants with scabby knees, as a young man trying to find his way in the world, as an adult attempting to bring food and medicine from their depths, and then as an old man trying to stay alive a little while longer. How fruitless and small must my life seem to them? To them, it's only been a little while, a season or two, since I started coming into the woods. But to me, it's been my whole life. I wonder what that must be like." I wanted to say something to lighten the mood, a stupid joke, a one-liner that would put everyone at ease, but I couldn't find anything to say. This was a little different from Grandpa. I wasn't used to him being so maudlin, quite this dark, and I began to wonder if we really were heading to some kind of finale. Grandpa sounded as if he were in the back of a wagon as he headed to the gallows, and the farther we walked, the more I hoped I was wrong. We'd get through this. We'd have more time with Grandpa, even if it was only a couple of months or a couple of years or even a couple of hours. There would be time for stories and time for another beer and time for so many other things. I had to believe that. If I didn't believe it, then why was I hauling him into the woods? If I didn't believe that, then why else was I saving him from the consequences of his actions? I tried not to think about his story, the last story he had ever told me, but it was hard. Grandpa had always told me about the sanctity of magic and the purity of life. Once things were dead, they were dead. You didn't go messing around with the natural order of things, but it appeared that Grandpa had tried to do just that. When his own power wasn't up to the challenge, he had gone and gotten more from a highly questionable source. These were things that Grandpa had told me not to do, had firmly warned me against because such things had dire consequences. I suppose it's hard to realize that my grandpa knew about those consequences from her first-hand experience. It made me wonder how many stories there were in between stories. Stories where he did things he wasn't proud of and was now feeling too ashamed to tell me. I didn't want to think about that, because I wanted my final memories of Grandpa to be the ones I would always keep with me. I wanted to remember him as that smiling old man who was sitting on the porch with a beer in his hand and a story on his lips. I didn't want to imagine my grandfather as someone capable of anything beyond joy and laughter. We walked in silence for a while, and the next one to speak was Glimmer. We were going over a small river, little more than a stream, but it was nearly 2.5 feet deep, and the current was a little treacherous. You had to be careful where you put your feet because the rocks were slippery. It was a place I'd been to before, and as I took Glimmer's hand so I could go up the other bank, I saw her looking at a stump not too far from the edge.
"This is where we met, Fisher. Do you remember? Do you remember that day?"
Grandpa looked at the stump, craning his neck around painfully, and smiled. "It's a memory I'll keep with me always," Grandpa said, as I turned around so he wouldn't hurt his neck. "I'll never forget looking up and seeing a pair of bright eyes as I cooked my fish. It was one of the best times of my life, and I was blessed to have you, Glimmer."
"Continue to be blessed, Fisher. I'm not quite ready to go without you yet.
She reached out and squeezed his hand, but as she took the lead again, I saw something sad cross Grandpa's face. We continued on, but it appeared that Glimmer wasn't the only one who had decided they couldn't go without Grandpa. As we moved through the woods, I was aware of something trailing us. It would get close and then move away again, but it was definitely following behind our group. I didn't know what it was, but sometimes I would get weird glimpses of a figure before he pulled himself behind a tree. I was almost certain it was the Weldergeist, but this deep in the woods, you couldn't be sure. It was very unsettling, and though I didn't tell John, I was quite sure that Glimmer knew we were being tracked. She would break off every now and again, only to come back to give me a thumbs up. I had no idea what the thumbs up meant, but I thought maybe she was hiding our tracks or maybe leaving a false trail for whatever was behind us. I checked my watch and saw that it was almost 11 o'clock when my stomach began to growl. We'd been hiking for about 5 hours, and I didn't suppose we were likely to stop for a meal until we arrived at the clearing. John was doing all right. He was keeping pace, and Glimmer seemed as if this was nothing but a short stroll for her. I suppose after all those hunting trips, that's basically what it was. She was used to long-distance hikes with a lot of gear on, and when she moved up next to me, I assumed she just wanted to bump my shoulder or give me a little support. When she whispered in my ear, I realized it was something a little more serious.
He's following us. He knows we have a party of 4.
Yeah, I said, peeking back as we walked. Has been for a while. Glimmer glanced at him for half a second before turning back. Grandpa made a sound, and I was about to ask what was wrong when he said, "We need a distraction."
John and I can keep walking forward while you and Fisher lose him, but we will need to make an illusion convincing enough to fool the creature.
Is that safe? I asked, half tripping over a root. Glimmer caught me by the shoulder and set me back on the path.
The guy doesn't have a deal with John or me. He can hurt us without reason, and this reason isn't good enough. Let us help and get him to the clearing before it's too late.
Gramps, can you manage that? He was silent for a minute, and when he nodded, I felt it in my shoulder. He didn't say anything, but suddenly there was a shimmer, and it was like someone had projected something over the top of us. At the same time, I focused my will on my part of the operation. I wasn't good at subtle things like veils and illusions, but there was something I could do. I could pull up something around us that would obscure our presence. And if he had the image to glance at, then he might not look too hard at my covering. We broke left as they broke right, and as I crouched off the path, I saw the Weldergeist emerge from the woods and follow after them. He was keeping a stalking distance from the group, clearly biding his time before he struck, and as he came to the crossroads, I held my breath and waited for him to pass. He paused for a moment, the Weldergeist less than 30 feet away from us, and I worried that maybe he had seen through our little trick. Then he headed off after them, and once he was out of sight, I took off. I moved as fast as I dared towards the clearing. We were close now. I could almost smell it, and Grandpa seemed to smell it too. He looked around, the picture of liveliness, and he wheezed a little for me to hurry. He hadn't coughed in a while, something that surprised me, and I hoped it was a good sign. Maybe the grove was where we should have gone all along. There was magic there, real magic, and the distance seemed to melt away as we came quickly through the trees. "So, what's the plan once we get there?" Grandpa didn't say anything, just lay against my back as he watched the forest thin out around him. "How long do we need to stay in the grove? Is there a time limit? Are we just staying there until the sun sets?" Grandpa still said nothing. If it hadn't been for the wheeze that he still had his breath every now and again. I would have thought he had simply expired, but I could still hear his respirations, and I knew that he could still hear me. Seriously, if you want me to help, I need to know what's going on. What are we doing in the grove? When he made a shushing sound, I was so surprised that I actually did stop talking. Don't worry about it. Just enjoy the trip. You never know how many more trips through the woods you have. One day, each of us will take our last trip through the woods, but we may not even know there isn't another one sometime later. I thought I had taken my last trip, my last walk through the trees, but it appears I had one more left in me. Don't worry about the grove, son. Just enjoy the trip. I know it's one that I'll never forget. I felt a sob creep up my throat, and I didn't fully understand it till later. I decided to take him up on his offer, and the two of us walked in silence until we finally came to the edge of the clearing. As we came into the grove, I saw it all set out before me. It was beautiful. The space had always made me feel a deeper connection to the woods around me. This was a place we came when we needed to clear our heads, when we were celebrating the turn of the seasons, or just because Grandpa wanted to visit his friend. When I sat down the pack and helped him to climb out, it was as if he had found a hidden wellspring of strength, and he walked slowly towards the tree that had once been his friend. Good to see you, Wren. He put his hand on the trunk, and as the sun fell across a few hanging leaves, it fell on the golden sap that lingered on the bark. Grandpa's hand was so close to the sap. Another inch, and he'd get to see what Wren had experienced. I started to say something, started to warn him, but he looked back at me with a grin that told me he knew what he was doing. Gramps, that sap, well... He slid his hand into the sap quickly before he could lose his nerve, and then stepped to the left of his friend as the change began to take place. He wiped the sap across both hands, swiped it across his face, and shook his head as the horror spread through me. Don't get too close, kid. This is my decision. This is how I want to go out. I didn't care. I went to him anyway. As his skin became hard and his hands began to lengthen, I hugged him against my chest as I wept. He could have told me. He could have said something. I didn't care at that moment if I became a tree too. Grandpa's life was saved, but this part of it would never be the same again. He would live as the very trees that he had questioned. He would never be my grandfather after today. I'd never hear him tell me another story. I'd never clink a beer against his bottle, and for all intents and purposes, he'd be gone. Don't cry, son, he said, his voice deepening as the wheeze left it. This is the only way. But the meadow, you said it would protect you. And it will. It will protect me forever. I will fear neither cancer, nor spirit, nor any of those earthly problems again. I will be of the forest. I'll be here with Wren and your grandmother forever. I heard something behind me, but I didn't turn. It didn't matter. My tears fell upon his bark as he began to stretch and grow. His features softened, His body elongated, and soon it was like talking to a pattern on the trunk. His eyes were still there, looking at me as his face rose, and he grew beyond my grip. I looked up and stared at that wise old face I loved so much. "You can visit me any time, son. This place is yours as well. Come visit me often, because I will miss you so much as you miss me. I love you so." He grated out, and as his mouth became one with the bark, and he stood before me as a tall, proud oak, I heard his voice in my head as he whispered, "And I always will. Thank you for ending this journey with me. Thank you for everything." Then he was gone. No, not gone. He'd moved beyond his and every other problem. When the spirit came into the glade, I felt the wrongness of him. When he moved up beside me, I started to tell him to go away. I started to tell him not to touch my grandfather, that he wasn't his to take anymore. I doubted it would have done any good, but it would have made me feel less weak. The Weldergeist touched the bark of Grandpa's tree, and when he began to laugh, I looked up at him to see him shaking his skeletal head. Clever old man. He figured out a way to cheat me. Well done. Our deal is at an end, I suppose. He gave Grandpa one more appreciative pat and turned to go. "Just like that?" I asked him. I knew I shouldn't have taunted him, but I didn't care right then. I was furious, and I needed something to direct my anger at. My dismay was also making me less fearful than I should have been, and I didn't care at that moment what happened. The Weldergeist shrugged. "I can't take his soul as long as he remains a tree. Our pact is complete. I will await your moment of weakness with great anticipation, Marcus," he added, walking into the woods as he took his leave. "It'll never happen," I shouted at his back, and his retort made it sound all the more hollow. "That's what everyone says, until the time comes." That was where Glimmer found us. I heard John come crashing out of the woods, and as Glimmer saw what had become of Grandpa, she wept and threw herself at the base of the tree. John looked confused, his wonder at the sight of the place clearly at odds with his curiosity about what was going on. Glimmer clung to the bottom of the tree as she cried, shouting his name as she pushed her forehead against the bark.
"He was supposed to wait. I told him not to. I begged him not to do this, but he said he wouldn't wait for me to get here. I wanted to say goodbye. I was owed a chance to say goodbye this time."
A part of me wanted to accuse her of knowing what he would do, but another part of me wanted nothing but to comfort the woman I loved, and that was the part of me that won out in the end. I put an arm around her and gave her the comfort that I had needed a short time ago, and as we cried there together, I heard John approach and put a hand on the old tree as he looked up into the leaves so high above. "So, wait, where's Grandpa?"
"He is here. He'll always be here. He'll be here so long as there are woods, so long as magic protect this place, and so long as we love him,"
Glimmer whispered, putting a hand on the bark. I nodded, Her words were a fine epitaph for a man I had loved so much, for a man who had meant so much to me and so many others. Her words only made John more confused, and when he looked down at us, his concern was genuine. So, wait, did your grandpa turn into a tree? John's question seemed to snap me back to reality, and when I looked at him, the set of his face made me laugh. I couldn't help it. It was just so ridiculous, and he was just so utterly confused by what must have made very little sense to him. Yeah, he did. Tell you what, I'll tell you all about it on the way home. Glimmer and I took one more look at Grandpa, now standing as a mighty oak tree beside his friend of so many years. Grandpa had been right. I would be able to come see him again. He'd always be here if I needed him, and I knew that there would be many trips in the future to come and check on the old man. For now, however, it was time to get back to life as it had always been, though it would certainly be strange without the old man. You see, I said, as I threw an arm around John and another around Glimmer as the three of us left the clearing. Grandpa had this friend when he was younger. His name was Wren, and he turned into a tree.